personalities, things in our relationships that we need to work on. And then Yom Kippur, we repent those and we sort of vow to work on them. And then we move into that next year with a mission statement, with a strategy, with some ideas, and how we're going to improve and transform our lives. So I wanted to take this evening to sort of focus a little bit more on what does healing look like in the Jewish tradition? What are some different ways, modes that we go about the idea of healing? If you were on the service on Friday night, and even the week before that as well, we've been talking about songs of healing, sort of what music refreshes us, renews us, lifts our spirits. And what are some experiences of healing? What are things that we can do to feel better? And so we're going to look at today a little bit of some Jewish sources, at prayer, and look at some other different Jewish texts around the idea of how do we heal as individuals and perhaps even as a community. So I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen. You veterans know I love the screen share. And so we're going to take a look at some text and go from there. Okay, that's what we want. There we go. Healing in the Jewish tradition. I always say if you're going to start, you better start big. So we're going to start off with God, okay? Because we can't talk about Judaism and healing without first talking about God. So it's actually a really fascinating text, and it's one that's very easy to miss in a way, because there's so much in this Torah portion, this part of the Torah, that's fascinating, because here we are right around Exodus from Egypt, right? This is the sort of the leaving of Egypt, the Exodus, and there's so much good stuff, right? But there's this passage right here, Exodus 15:26, and so I think Moses said, if you will heed the eternal your God diligently, doing what is upright in God's sight, giving ear to God's commandments, giving all of God's laws, then I will not bring upon you any of the diseases I brought upon the Egyptians, for I, the eternal, am your healer. Okay, it's the only time in the Bible that God is referred to as Rophe. God is a healer. God is your doctor. God, MD. God is the one who can cure disease. And so it's a very interesting theological statement that we get right in Exodus, that God is the one who can bring about disease. We remember that the Egyptians were struck with lots of plagues. Some of them were health related, right? Boils, right? There were some things that were pretty unpleasant. So God is saying, I'm not going to give you, these diseases. If you're going to be observant of the commandments, you're going to be in a relationship, with God. If you're going to do the right things, I will in fact heal you. So it's a very interesting, right off the bat, theological statement that God is the healer. Of course, this can then descend into a greater discussion, which it does in the rabbinic literature about, well, if God can heal you, do you have to go to the doctor? And the answer is yes. Yes, you do. The rabbis say very clearly, all the way back in 200 CE, 300 CE, they said, no, you still go to the doctor, because God heals, right? God is the healer, but God also teaches people how to heal. God imbues us with wisdom, right? And with a skill set to learn how to care for the body. And so you can't just pray for healing, as we're going to talk about in a moment, but yes, it is also incumbent upon someone who is sick to seek medical treatment, because God does endow human beings with the ability to heal. But again, right up top, God is healer, very interesting. And this is also going to be echoed in Psalms. Happy is the one who is thoughtful of the wretched. In bad times, may the Eternal keep them from harm. May the Eternal guard them and preserve them, and they may be thought happy in the land. Do not subject them to the will of their enemies. The Eternal will sustain them on their sick bed. You will wholly transform their bed of suffering, right? And so this is a little bit more metaphorical, I think, but this will give you the same idea that God is the one that can help us on the journey from sickness to health, right? That God is the one who has some power, some control here. But again, we also have that flip, that we also have to do the right things as well. And so one can see that parallel in a way that if you do the right things, if you live the right way, maybe perhaps you'll be shielded, right, from some of these sicknesses. We can sort of look at it that way as well. The idea of saying, hey, if you're going to do things to abuse your body, right, and things that are prohibited or frowned upon in Jewish law, if you abuse your body in certain ways, then your body's going to fail you, right? You're going to have different issues, later on. But if you do the right things, you take care of your body, you might be able to shield yourself from illness, right? So that is an idea that comes through here, I think, a little bit about that idea about what does it mean to do the right thing when it comes to our health, when it comes to how we take care of ourselves. Some things we're going to learn about pretty soon this weekend, I would say, is some things that are in our control, obviously, when it comes to our health, and some things not so much, right? And so there are many different kinds of illnesses, and some of them are more preventable based on our actions, about what we do. And if God gives us a path, and maybe this is how you can live a healthier life, if we know to do the right things, we have the information in our heads that we have learned, and we know how to live in such a way to be healthy, we wear our mask, then maybe, things won't be, so bad for us, depending on the circumstance, right? Okay, so that is a little bit about God and healing. Now we're going to jump into the good stuff. We're going to jump into some prayer. Okay, that's sort of the fun part here for us today. Asher Yatzar. Sharon, you want to read this for me in the English?
Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who formed the human body with skill, creating the body's many pathways and openings. It is well known before your throne of glory that if one of them be wrongly opened or closed, it would be impossible to endure and stand before you. Blessed are you, Adonai, who heals all flesh, working wonders.
Very nice. We can all unmute ourselves. If you give them background noise, you can unmute yourselves for a second or two here, because we're talking about this prayer in a little bit of detail. So yeah, you can feel free to unmute. So, has anybody heard this prayer before? You can show of hands,
No.
No? I'm going to try to see if I can get a little bit more people on this. There we go. Here we go. And so I'm hitting the ask to unmute. If you're, I'm not sure if you're able to unmute yourselves on this setting. I'm not sure what has been done. So, okay. So this prayer is said in the very, very beginning of the Shabbat morning service. It's actually part of the beginning of every service, and it is affectionately known as the bathroom prayer. It's the prayer you're supposed to say after you go use the restroom. And so it always gets a giggle from everybody, really. But it's a good one to teach the kids. And so it's not only about that, but that's where it has the most fame. And it was supposed to be said at home, but then eventually got transitioned to a synagogue prayer as well. It's part of what's called Birkot HaShachar, the morning blessings that we recite when we wake up. There's a whole group of them. And right in the beginning, you have two prayers. A prayer that praises God, right, for the creation of the body, right, the gift of the body, and it's followed right after it with Elohai Neshama, which speaks about our soul, giving thanks to God for our souls. From the very beginning of the prayer service, you have giving thanks for the body and giving thanks for the soul, sort of our physical, corporeal, and our spiritual. So we get both in the very early goings. What I love about this prayer, I love many things about this prayer, is that it's very graphic in its way, especially once I told you what it's used for a lot of things. It's very sort of visceral in a way, where it speaks very much about the human body, our anatomy. I'm going to ask for people to mute again, because I'm hearing a little bit of the distortion in the background. So if you can mute again, that'd be great. So we have, there's a lot of noise coming through. Oh, thank you, thank you. Okay, so I'm not sure where it is. Okay, so yeah, so yes, and so thanks God for the openings and closings of the body. And if you think about it, as I do, we don't often think of the human body as a miracle. We sort of, we're physical beings, we're corporeal beings, we're made of matter, flesh, bone, and blood. But the very fact that we exist, according to Jewish tradition, is a miracle, because every day we wake up in the morning, and remember, this is what you say one of the first things when you get out of bed, right? This is what is said, because one of the first things you do when you wake up usually is you go use the facilities, right? And so it's one of the first things that one says, in the morning. But you imagine, we're going to take it on a lower level and move to a higher level. But for all of us who have had an upset stomach, for those of us who have had some gastrointestinal distress, not to be overly graphic on such things, it's not fun. It's not a good day, okay? It's uncomfortable. You feel very immobilized and nauseated, and just, it's an unpleasant sort of feeling all the way around, and that stinks. And so every day we don't have that, hooray! Every day that our body is working like it's supposed to work, that's wonderful, right? And in Jewish tradition, that's a miracle. Then you think about, unfortunately, a different level, right? Is that when things open in your body that are supposed to be closed, that could be a very serious thing. You think about the human heart, for example, right? There are some things that need to be open, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they are closed. And sometimes it can be the other way. Things are just, they're too wide open, and whatever else is going on. And then you're having a hemorrhage, you're having another issue, right? So for the human body to work correctly, to work as it's supposed to work, thanks God. I had an Orthodox professor who would always talk about this with me, that if one of your cells, the human body is made out of, organs and tissues, but even on a molecular level, you get down to the cells themselves. If some of those cells start acting up and changing, right, in a negative way, there's a word for that, right? When our cells start mutating and transforming and being things that are different than they're supposed to be. And it's not a good word. And it's not a fun thing, right? So there are all of these illnesses that we can have if just tiny, we can't even see it, right, in our bodies, begin to go wrong, it can be a very serious problem. And so every morning, what a mitzvah, what a blessing it's supposed to be for us if we wake up and we have the use of our body, we have the use of our minds, our physicality, that we're okay, we're able to get up and do things, right, that we might take for granted. So it's really important, according to Jewish tradition, to thank God for our bodies, for when they work, because sometimes they don't, right? And we know how lousy that can be, and that lousiness can exist on a small scale or a large scale about our bodies and what they can, what they can do, and sometimes what they can't do, or what's happening, what's affecting them. So you look at the very end of that prayer, that it would be impossible to endure, right, to stand before you. If our bodies don't work correctly, we literally might not be able to stand up, right, and endure. We can't exist if our bodies don't work the right way. And so that is Asher Yatzar. Does anyone have any questions on that one before I move ahead a little bit? Okay. Trying to see what I have here. There we go. Okay. I'm trying to get the best of both worlds here, instead of have you more on my screen, but also share the screen at the same time. For those of you, by the way, who might be Zoom aficionados, and those of you who might not be, if you look at the very top of your screen, you should be seeing something that's, I think it's in a green color, but it might not be, where it says, like, you are viewing Rabbi's screen or Temple of Israel's screen. You can nod if you see that. And you're viewing, I think it probably says TBI's screen or whatever it is. Right next to it, you'll see something that says View Options. And if you hit that and scroll that down, there are different ways you can view the presentation. So you can actually make it so you're seeing the screen that I'm sharing, and also the other, the other things 50-50 in a different way. So just one thing, a little Zoom hack for those of us who aren't necessarily used to using Zoom. but there are ways of playing with the view on your screen that can optimize sort of what you're getting out of it, of the experience. I only mention it only because that it took me about 4 months before I realized that thing was there. I feel like I'm still learning Zoom tricks every time I use it, and I've been using it every day for what feels like forever. Okay, anyway, let's move forward a little bit to Numbers 12, 10 through 13. A fantastic episode here where Miriam talks a little bit of trash, as we used to say, speaks a little of Lashon Hara against her brother. And then she got a problem. So I'm going to read about that problem right now. Let's see here. Oh, wrong button. My goodness. See, I used to know what I was doing with this. There we go. Melissa, you want to read a little bit? You got to unmute. Go ahead.
As the cloud withdrew from the tent, there was Miriam stricken with snow-white scales. When Aaron turned toward Miriam, he saw that she was stricken with scales. And Aaron said to Moses, O my Eternal, account not to us the sin which we committed in our folly. So Moses cried out to the Eternal, saying, O God, please heal her, please.
Very nice. Okay, and in the Hebrew, El na refana la. That one has become a lot more common, that Hebrew expression. It's a great example, one of the few, by the way, that we have in the Torah itself, a little more in later biblical literature, but in the Torah itself, of spontaneous prayer, right? You know, we have Moses here in his shock and dismay at Miriam's condition. As I said, Miriam wasn't behaving so great, and so God gives her a little bit of leprosy. It's not really leprosy, it's an easy way of calling it. The Hebrew is sara'at, and it's often translated as leprosy or whatever. It's not leprosy, but it's some kind of affliction, some kind of skin disease that she gets that is frankly quite unpleasant. And then Miriam is going to have to be put out of the community for like 7 days in order for her to go through this period of punishment and impurity. But Moses tries to, avert this. Moses tries to circumvent this a little bit. And maybe one might say Moses had the punishment lessened a little bit, that it wasn't a long-term illness for her. It was only a week, that she gets stricken with this sara'at. And he says, El na rafana la. It's really a beautiful prayer when you think about it. It also reminds me of the rabbinic aphorism, where it says, it's time for a long prayer and it's time for a short prayer. And in this time, Moses said it was time for a short prayer. It's time for something quick, easy, but it's also emotional and to the point, right? You see the Hebrew word na there. It gets used twice. Na doesn't really have a specific definition as a Hebrew word. It's an interjection. And it's used when we see biblical figures, biblical characters in a pleading sort of way. And so that's why I used please twice here, because it's na is used twice. El na, rafana, la. God, el, God, na, please, rafa, heal, na, please, her, So God, please, heal her, is what we get here. And this prayer has been used, in contemporary Jewish healing, Jewish healing music as almost an anthem to use, because it stresses, I think, the immediacy of it, how important healing can be, and how badly we want it. That we don't have that. It's a very direct plea and appeal to God. And again, now a long prayer, just 5 words. El na rafana la. God, heal her, please. Sometimes healing, it can't come fast enough. So that's, I think, a really good one. Next, we have Rifa'enu. So Rifa'enu is actually part of the Amidah during the week. So this is, as a quick little step back, a little tangent. The Amidah, Tefillah, It's called the 18 benedictions. It's actually 19 benedictions, which is counting, but there are 18 benedictions. And on Shabbat, we say 6 of them. That's the Avot V'Imahot, the prayers about our father, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Givurot, about God's power. Kedusha, about God's holiness, etc., etc. During Shabbat, we only do 6 because the other 12/13 of these prayers are what are called petitionary prayers. We ask God for stuff that we want. And according to rabbinic tradition and rabbinic wisdom, it's Shabbat. We don't bother God with stuff that we want, stuff that we need on Shabbat. That's for the other days. Because on Shabbat, what does God do? God rests like the rest of us. God needs a day off too. And so Shabbat's time for praise and for thanksgiving. It's not for pestering God with whatever we need. So those 13 prayers are taken out from Shabbat and they're used during the week. So Rifa'enu is the healing prayer that we say during the week, during the Amidah, during that prayer of 19 benedictions. And so it says here, Rifa'enu Adonai v'nirafeh hoshienu v'nivashea kita hilatenu ata. So heal us, Adonai, and we shall be healed. Save us, and we shall be saved. For you are our glory. Bring complete healing to all of our wounds, etc., etc., etc. It keeps going. What I wanted to mention for this particular prayer, that if we were to look into the books of the prophets, as I know some of us did in some great detail with me this year, you'll find the words of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah says, Rifa'eni Adonai v'arapeh. So, right, it's the same thing, but it's in the singular, right? And so this prayer is actually lifted word for word, basically, except for changing it from singular here to plural from the text of Jeremiah. So the origin of this prayer is actually just from Jeremiah. So it's from the book of the prophets. And in the prayer version, it gives us an us, because we want to be communal, right? We want to have that communal experience of healing. So it isn't about one person, it's about everybody. And so that's why here it's been made in the plural form. Okay, let's move on to the next. Devarim Rabbah, one of my favorites here. Marilyn Warner, you want to read a little bit?
Well, I'm having trouble with my screen. I really can't see it.
It's okay. It's okay.
Sorry.
I'll catch you on the next one. I'll catch you on the flip side with it. Let's see. It's hard to see if there's any hands, some volunteers to read. So I'm not cold calling people, Let me see. Can anyone raise a hand if they want to read? No volunteers that I can see. You must want to really hear my melodious voice. So I will read a little bit more. Another thing, didn't Moses say before at the burning bush, I am not a man of words? It's actually one of my favorite lines from Fiddler. I think those who have heard me teach, I think have heard me say this before. But there's that wonderful scene in Fiddler of Tevye, putting out these different biblical quotes. And it's like, and David says, blah, 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 and his friend corrects him and says, no, that was Moses. And he says, oh, as Abraham says, blah, 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 blah. And his friend says, no, that was also Moses. And this keeps going for a couple rounds. And then Tevye says, man, for a man slow of speech, he talks an awful lot. And so we have this here in this Midrash. So I guess Shalom Aleichem lifted it from the Midrash here. Another thing, didn't Moses say before at the burning bush, I am not a man of words, with the idea being, Moses, for someone who is supposed to have a speech impediment, a lisp, some kind of issue speaking, right? We don't know if it's physical or whether it's a psychological issue or self-confidence issue, but for whatever reason, he says he's a man slow of speech. There's the Midrash that teaches that when he was a baby, some of you probably heard this story before, when he was a baby, according to this rabbinic story, they have a test for him because there's concern that maybe he will be the one to overthrow Pharaoh in Egypt. And this midrash envisions him living in Pharaoh's house, and the soothsayers and the magicians say, oh, he's going to be a problem later, this Moses. I feel it. There's going to be an issue here. So they devise a test for him. They take baby Moses, they put him on a table, and they put two different sort of pots, two different containers in front of him. One with gold and shiny things, and the other one has hot coal in it. And the test is that if he takes the shiny things, it means that Moses is going to be a problem for Pharaoh, and they're going to have to kill him off right now. And if he takes, the coals, they'll say, oh, it's not a problem. But baby's just like grabbing at stuff. Doesn't matter. So what they do is they give him this test, and Moses, because he's a baby, what's he want to grab? The shiny stuff, the glittery, sparkly things. So as he's reaching out to the jewels, to the gold, whatever it is, the angel comes and takes baby Moses' hands and puts it in the hot coals. And of course, what's the baby going to do when his hand is hot and he's burning? What's he going to do? Put it right in his mouth. And so he burns his tongue and he burns his lip. And that gives him a speech impediment for the rest of his life, that he burns himself. So that's how the rabbis explain this idea that he is not a man of words, that he's slow of speech and tongue, because he has a physical affliction, that he hurt himself. And so this is playing off that idea that he is not a man of words, but with the underlying question being, if he's not a man of words, how come the entire book's him talking, from especially Deuteronomy? So Rabbi Elazar says, back then he stuttered, but because he busied himself with Torah, his tongue was healed. Yay! So that's why he says he's not a man of words before, and now it says these are the words, because he's now healed through study. Behold, the language of the living tree heals. This is from the Proverbs, the idea that if we study Torah, if we do the right thing and do a little bit of studying, it's going to bring healing to our lives. I'm going to ask you guys to unmute a little bit, because that way I kind of feel like we can have a little more conversation. Hopefully it won't be too loud. Let's see, I'm going to ask.
Breaking up.
Yeah, it's not so easy to unmute, it turns out. Okay. But for those who would like to unmute, don't have a ton of noise in the background, you can certainly do that. So, here's a question, because we're going to get to one more in a minute. What actions do we take that we believe can lead to our healing, to our good health when we're not feeling well?
Right.
Prayer.
Prayer, okay. So prayer brings about some healing for us.
Following the commandments.
Following some commandments is always good. No one likes vitamin C?
Right. That's a good one.
Get your nurse.
Rest.
A little rest, thank God. A little rest would be nice.
I get my nurse here to help me.
Would be nice.
Some loving care from our loved ones, certainly.
That's it.
TLC. A little matzo ball soup, perhaps.
Oh yeah, that would be good.
Follow what the doctor says.
Yeah, follow what the doctor says. Does anybody either have that friend or perhaps are that friend that when somebody gets sick, you're like, hey, take this blah, 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 some Michigas, right? Whatever it is, some homeopathic thing, and you'll feel better in 2 days?
Mm-hmm.
It works, I tell you, Rabbi. Just take this thing and it'll be fine. Eat some more zinc. What's the Zicam? Zicam was always the big one. I don't know if
Right.
Zicam.
What's that?
Airborne.
Yeah.
Anyone take airborne before they fly? It's been a while. I remember people were swearing by that. So there are different things that we can do, right? From a Jewish perspective, some prayer, some following the commandments, etc. Hopefully, you can help lead to better health. And there's other actions that we take. Is there a connection, you think, between study and healing?
because you're calmer. You're calmer, so you're more relaxed. You're more rested.
Yeah, so things that we enjoy doing, perhaps, right, might have a benefit on our overall general well-being.
The one th-
If you're studying, you're not cutting up.
Yeah,
Get fresh air.
some fresh air, very important. Studying outside, right, could be nice, right? Sukkot's coming up, so studying outside,
exercise.
get some fresh air, a little sea breeze, a little Torah, not the worst thing.
Exercise.
A little exercise,
Oh, yeah.
a little walking meditation. Might be nice. This can't meditate when you're crossing the street, but you can, but meditation is good when we walk. Very, I think very good as well. Meditation generally can be a great source of preventative in a way. That way, like if we're relaxed, we feel good, we're not going to get sick. It'd be nice, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of studying, and for those of you who are intrepid enough to hear my sermon on Kol Nidre, which will be released probably on Kol Nidre around there, I'm going to discuss that a little bit about so that'll be good. But certainly, yes, there is an idea that the things that we do, even if they don't seem to be directly related to healing, can be a source of healing, right? For us. There are things that we can put into the world and put out of the world, maybe that to influence how we're doing.
I don't know if they third inning and Lau is out on strikes against the right-hander Sanchez.
I hear the Rays game, and so whoever might have the Rays game
Sorry.
in the background, you might need to either. There you go. And hey, look, my kid's watching it now too. So actually, he's not, because of the we have Frontier, and they have a whole thing going on now with Fox Sports, and so actually don't have the Rays games right now in the same way. That's another Talmud class, another Torah class on the evils of cable TV. Okay, messing my kid around. Okay. Misha Barach, a different version, but it is a traditional version. This is not Debbie Friedman, to be sure, but I wanted to call your attention to it because it is actually, I think, very interesting. And so you have the "May the Lord bless our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses and Aaron, David and Solomon." So this is obviously a very male version of it because it's a traditional one. But you get, these 7 in particular. Why these 7? Why not? It's good 7, right? If you're going to have a very male-centric one, these would be the 7. According to tradition, these are actually the Ushpizin. The Ushpizin are heavenly visitors that come to our sukkah during Sukkot, 1 per each night. I'm not sure if that's actually the connection here, but that's what just jumps to my mind, is the Ushpizin who visit us during Sukkot. But anyway, bless, the first name, son of the mother's name. Misha Barach, as a note, from a traditional standpoint, when we say the Hebrew name, usually when we do a Hebrew name, it is, your Hebrew name, son of, and then it's your father's name, and then your mother's name, or just your father's name, depending on the household, whatever it is. Misha Barach is the only time when you do the person's Hebrew name, the person's name, and the son of the mother. The father isn't mentioned in the Misha Barach. Why is that, we think?
Is this more into our century?
Say again?
Is this more into our century?
No, this is old. This is an older thing. This is from Middle Ages, if not a little bit earlier.
But the mothers weren't considered.
They weren't considered for some things, but why for this one, do you think?
Are you Jewish because of your mother?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, Jewish, by this time, certainly Judaism was matrilineal, right? So you have Judaism, evidence of evidence is the wrong word, but if your mom's Jewish, you're Jewish according to matrilineal descent, which by then already happened. But you have to think a little bit more, in maybe an unfortunately a gendered way. When you think about your parents, so I'll put it a different way. When my kid gets a boo-boo, who do they go to? They go to mom, and only because she's a doctor, but they go to mom, right? When they have a nightmare at night, who are they calling for? Mom, mommy. I got 3 of them, and I get a lot of mommies right now. And sometimes it's daddy, but it's usually Elizabeth saying, "Get out of bed, your turn, go get him." Because I've been up 5 times already with these kids. And because the mother, because there's an idea that the mothers are more nurturing, right? More supportive, more of a source of healing, right? So, I see a couple disagreements, right? Which I don't blame you for, by the way. I think that's certainly accurate enough. But from a traditionalist standpoint, that mommy is the kisser of the boo-boos, more than daddy is. That you get this idea that you are invoking the mother's name here. We have even in Psalms, we have a beautiful psalm, a beautiful reading. It was after the exile from Israel, the Babylonian exile, and the psalm pictures Rachel, and it's Rachel, of Jacob and Rachel, of that fame. It's Rachel who weeps for her children, and so it's Rachel who is the caregiver in that moment. And so since the mothers, I think, are seen as the more caregiver model, they're the ones who are invoked in the healing blessing, which is unusual. I think that has been mentioned, in our prayers, that the mother's name is used, because sometimes the women's names are a little bit more pushed to the side. Certainly talking about a medieval prayer, certainly. So you see, again, evidence in the very beginning that this is all the patriarchs, and none of the matriarchs are in here just yet, right? But it goes through the mom. That's not the only fascinating thing about this prayer. Let's read the next sentence, which is going to be delightful for everybody. For which, so, bless, this person with healing, for which whoever the person saying the prayer is, vows to give charity for his sake. Tzedakah cures, okay? You want some healing? Write a check. Amen, okay? My God. So aside from the fact that this is a little bit on the nose, right? This is very specific about money, right? It goes back to that question that I asked about the actions that lead to healing. That are things that are unrelated, perhaps, to healing, or maybe we think are unrelated to healing on one hand, connected to healing maybe in a different way. What are we putting out into the world, right? And do our mitzvot, the different mitzvahs that we do they account, right, for healing? If we do X, are we going to get Y? This is a very biblical, understanding, obviously. And biblical, I mean the reward and punishment model. You do good stuff happens. You do bad stuff happens. Life ain't that simple, but that's the biblical sort of like model. And that's where I think this sort of comes in, right? That if you do a mitzvah, maybe good stuff will happen to you. Maybe good things will happen. But aside from it being more direct, right? So I wouldn't ever want to take this sort of literally, but to take it more metaphorically again, I think it sort of looks at that idea of what are the things that we can do, what are the mitzvahs we can perform that might improve our own healing. Because I think writing a check for $50 is always nice. I don't think it's going to guarantee anyone's health. I'll put it that way. I don't think that's going to be a good deal to go on. I wouldn't I wouldn't wager that one. But I think it's more just the idea that if we are able to perform mitzvot, maybe it's better for our own spiritual well-being, and maybe that spiritual healing can help us in our physical healing in some way. And that if we believe there is a connection between the healing of the mind and healing of the body, right, or the life of the spirit and the life of the body, that there are things that we can do to make us feel good, make others feel good, that perhaps then help us physically as well. Just a thought to throw in there, but I love that that's in there. That to give, it's a vow, right? We have Kol Nidre coming up. For those of you who have some Hebrew, it's Noder over here, so it's Nun Daled Resh. So it's a person who vows. And here we have Tzedakah right there, Tzedakah in there. Just in case you thought I was making it up. Tzedakah's right there for us. And then, as a reward for this, may the person, may God be filled with mercy towards this person, heal him, strengthen him, etc., etc., etc. There's also another version of this prayer that's all hers. That's all the, that's for a woman, but this one was for a man, a male healing. Okay. Any questions so far?
When we say the Meshavarach every week, though we don't say vow to give charity.
No, this is an older version. The Debbie Friedman version doesn't ask you to write a check.
Okay.
Yeah, no. Debbie Friedman, I don't think it would have been as popular. Bless those in need of healing, but only if you write a check. No, I don't think that would be a bestseller. But to be fair, Debbie made some money off that song too, so but God bless her. I mean, may her memory always be for a blessing. I feel like we sometimes forget. It's sort of tangential. We sort of forget, what a huge impact she's had on Jewish music, and we almost take it for granted that we do that prayer almost every week. And it was written by, Debbie Friedman, who was not a well woman, and it's one of those things where the Misha Berach, I think, might have been so meaningful for her because she was not a well person, physically. She died very young, comparatively. But again, she has gifted us with so much music, and even more so, if we could even say even more so, but even more so inspired so many song leaders and musicians to come up and to create even more Jewish music. And a lot of it goes back to Debbie Friedman. Yeah.
Rabbi, I signed up for a seminar on Thursday about Debbie Friedman's life. Signed up for it today.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting.
It'll be very interesting. She was a fascinating person, and just there are synagogues that you would not expect, I'll put it that way, in the conservative and Orthodox movement that use her melodies too. And they don't always know where it comes from or whatever it is, but that's how much it's permeated the Jewish zeitgeist, is that her music is sometimes used by people who you wouldn't necessarily think would use her music, I'll put it that way. So, for a variety of reasons. But that's a wonderful tangent. Okay. So we're going to move down a little bit to Bikur Cholim. So we have healing, through God, healing through prayer, healing through deeds, healing through tzedakah, but we have Bikur Cholim, which means visiting the sick, healing through presence. And I'm aware of the time. I don't want to rush it, but I will try to get you out of here by 8ish, because I'm just that kind of guy. Somewhat on time. I don't want to add to my reputation. So anyway, Bikur Cholim. It's one of my favorite passages anyway in the Bible. So I'm a big Genesis guy. Like, in those of you who study with me, I love Genesis. It's just the most fascinating book, I think, in the Torah, and it's obviously one of the most fascinating books in the Bible. But Genesis is just amazing. And so we have here, the Eternal appeared to him, and this him here, I'm going to change that him just for my sake. Abraham, by the terebinths of Mamre. He was sitting at the entrance of his tent as the day grew hot. So Abraham's outside. Now this is going to be the story. This is the prelude. This is the precursor to the story of Abraham seeing the three other people that are sort of further away from him in the desert. And he gets up and he runs to welcome them, and he brings them into his tent. And he and Sarah, prepare a nice meal for everybody. And they sit and they talk and they refresh the guests. And the guests then turn out perhaps to be angels. And the angels then tell Abraham that he and Sarah, even though they're both advanced in years, will conceive a son. And Sarah laughs, and that's why we have the name Isaac later, because Isaac comes from the word for laughter. right? And so that's the story that this follows, this one verse that the Eternal appeared to Abraham sort of by his tent. So Abraham's outside at his tent. You would ask, perhaps, why? Why is he sitting outside to begin with? You know, those of us who are Floridians, exactly, it's schwitzy. You know, you want to be inside in the tent, right? You know, there was no air conditioning back then, but you know, you get in the tent, some shade. You have a little goat's milk on ice. There's no ice, but you got some goat's milk, whatever it is. Cool down, refresh a little bit in your tent. Why is he sitting outside schwitzing? You know, who wants that? So the reason is, according to tradition, that this was right after, at the ripe old age of 80 years old, he had just circumcised himself. And so because he had circed himself, he needed a little breath of air. So he was sort of out there recuperating in the heat a little bit more. Maybe that felt a little bit better than being in the tent. So some fresh air. I think we had heard from someone, fresh air exercise can be healing. So he was sort of out recuperating from his wound, so to speak, from his procedure, which, by the way, makes him jumping up to run and greet his other guests an even greater mitzvah than before, because, you know, ouch. So yes, and so he's there, ouch. So it says the Eternal appeared to Abraham there. So the rabbi said, well, what's God doing appearing to Abraham? You know, here, what's the Torah trying to say? And what the Torah is trying to say is what God is doing here, according to Rashi, who's a commentator, the Eternal appeared to him, to Abraham, to visit the sick. All right? So Rabbi Chama says it was the third day since the circumcision, and God wanted to check on him. Hey, man, how you feeling? You know, it's a rough couple days. You know, thanks for the sacrifice, so to speak. But you know, how you feeling anyway? Because when we're 80, we don't heal up so well. That's why, you know, 8 days is much better. You know, so God came in to check. God brought some matzo ball soup. You know, maybe a couple of DVDs. You know, whatever it might be, maybe some ice cream and whatnot. You know, and so they came to visit. Hey, Abe, how you doing? It's a beautiful idea, a beautiful passage that God is going to come to visit the sick. God is going to help people who are feeling ill. So it really is, I think, this fantastic teaching that God performs the mitzvah, right, of visiting the sick, of coming to Abraham when he's not feeling well. But now, of course, we get to the next level on this, which is a Talmudic quotation. I had to edit this to make this have made some sense to it. So Rabbi Chama, the son of Rabbi Hananiah, says, what is the meaning of that which is written? And after the Eternal your God shall you walk, and God you shall revere, and God's commandments shall you keep, and to God's voice you shall hearken, God you shall serve, etc., etc. You know, God shall you. So what does all that mean in Deuteronomy? What does it mean to walk in God's paths? What does it mean to keep God's commandments? What does it mean to serve God? And so he answers his own question, as rabbis are wont to do. He answers his own question. Rather, the meaning is one should follow the attributes of God, right? So that's how we walk in God's path. That's how we, you know, show that we revere God and how we're keeping commandments, is by trying to follow the attributes of God. There is a teaching, and it's actually a Catholic teaching. It's St. Francis of Assisi that came up with this all the way in the Middle Ages, of imitatio Dei, the idea that we can somehow imitate, we can somehow be like God, and each religion has a pathway of doing that. And so Judaism is no different. You think with the very first commandment we have basically in the Torah, right, is the Sabbath, right? We rest on the Sabbath. Why do we rest on the Sabbath?
Because God said so.
Not because God said so, but that's true. Yeah. Because God did.
God did, yeah.
God did that, right? So God works 6 days to create, and God rests on the seventh. And then God commands as well, as you said, Shannon. So God tells us to. But the reason is a remembrance, right, of the fact that God did the same thing. God rests, we rest, right? We are supposed to try to be in that. It's a mind-blowing teaching if you really want to think about it like in a different way. Is that like we are trying to be like God in the way that we can. We can't be like God because we're not infinite, right? We're not eternal or all-powerful, depending on your visions of God, and omniscient, omnipotent, all that other good stuff. We can't do that. But we can follow and walk in God's ways by imitating the attributes of God. And so, and this continues a little bit more, and then I'll just pick up here. Just as the Holy One, blessed be God, visits the sick, as it relates to the story with the circumcision, right? So should you visit the sick, right? So as God does this mitzvah, you do this mitzvah. As God helps, an X, whatever it might be, as God clothes the naked, we have to clothe the naked. God clothes Adam and Eve, right? That's part of the story. Is God gives Adam and Eve clothing after they eat the fruit of the tree and the whole thing. So God clothes them, and so we have to clothe the naked too. As God buries Moses, right? We're supposed to help bury those who have passed away. But in the intermediate here, we have the idea of God. As God visited the sick, we visit the sick too. And I think it's a great reminder, right, that when we visit the sick, it's a mitzvah, but it's actually also an imitation, a replication of what God did with Abraham. And if imitation truly is the sincerest form of flattery, what a wonderful thing it is then for us when we visit the sick to sort of think that way, to think that we are doing not only a mitzvah, but we're doing something that is an action that God took as well to visit the sick. And so I love that idea because it almost, to me, it elevates it in a way that we know it's a mitzvah, right? We know it's an important thing to do. We know it's the nice thing to do. But it's also the right thing to do, and maybe it's the holy thing to do as well, is to visit the sick. Because you know what? It's not the easiest thing in the world to visit the sick, right? That's not the easiest thing for a variety of reasons, and certainly now it isn't the easiest thing. But I think it's a reminder that it's important. And if one wants to extend this further in a different way, to say, well, what does Bikur Cholim, what does visiting the sick mean in the 21st century? What does it mean in the age of COVID, as well? Maybe it means making that phone call, that extra phone call. Maybe it means sending that extra email or text, and just checking in on people. How you doing? How are you feeling? Because it's to remember that people don't always ask for the help that they need. And for us to be proactive and to make that phone call, and again, in non-COVID times, to make that visit. I don't know how many of you have had the experience of being hospitalized before. And the hospital is not a fun place to be, I'm sure, as those who have been can attest. It's lonely, it's out of sorts, it's confusing, there's a lot going on. And someone stops by for half an hour with some chit chat and whatever it might be. And in that moment, it's uplifting, right? In that moment, it makes us feel better. And if we can go back to the idea, right, that our physical and our mental well-being can be seen as inextricably linked together, if we have an improvement in our mental condition and our spiritual condition, perhaps that aids in the healing process. And so there's more teachings about Bikur Cholim that we didn't have time to get into tonight, but the idea that the rabbis teach that when we visit the sick, it's like we're taking away their pain. It's like we're taking away some of it. Not all of it. They use 1/60th. So you take away a little bit, but you know what? Sometimes that helps. If it's just a little bit, you take a little bit of the burden off somebody, it makes it a lot easier. And it even goes in the reverse, where Rabbi Akiba actually says the one who doesn't visit the sick, it's like one who sheds blood, because you can be seen as having a deleterious effect, a negative effect on somebody's health if you don't do the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim. So he takes the negative. I like the positive way better. But the idea being that we can really be a source of uplift to people when we help them, when we're there to aid them when they're sick. And I go back to tzedakah even, not the actual, not the giving of tzedakah for health, but just the idea of tzedakah, that, tzedakah is not is not a nice thing to do. Tzedakah is the right thing to do, according to Jewish tradition, right? Because it comes from the word tzedek, which means justice, right? So tzedakah is not about charity, and that's how it's usually translated, but it's about doing the right thing. And for Bikur Cholim, I think it's about it very similarly, that it's not a question of, is it a nice thing to do? Of course it's nice. We know it's nice, but that's not the point. And the point is that it's the right thing to do. And it is the godlike thing to do, in a way. So I want us to encourage us all, to be able to do that when we get a chance to. Thank you, Polly. You got a nice little chat box, is always a good thing. So yeah, but that I think is what we're looking at, is the idea that we can be that source of strength and uplift to people when we check in on them, when we visit them, when we pray for them, when we take actions, right, to improve our own health, because that's important too, because we can't help others unless we take care of ourselves. So we have to make sure that we're healthy and we can go out and help those who might not be feeling well. So that is my spiel for the evening. 8 o'clock on the dot on my computer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you all so much for coming, part of this teaching.
Very good spiel, Rabbi.
Thank you. I
Good
appreciate
spiel.
it. Good spiel.
Good night, all.
Good night. Friday at 7 o'clock. Be there or be square.
We'll be there.
We'll be there.
Actually, you can sign in a little early. Some information is going to be coming out. But I'm not going to spoil the surprises. I'm not going to do anything to do such a thing. But there's going to be some surprises in store. There's some different things, and not to oversell it, but the cantor has just been phenomenal and just really working on some really creative, innovative things.
That's great.
For us. And so, God willing, Zoom will hold up. Everything will be fine.
Yes.
But it's exciting and it's fun, and it's going to be the fruits of everyone's labors for the high holidays. And I think it will be. It's going to be different, but it's going to be a really, I think, meaningful experience. So I'm looking forward to sharing it with all of you on Friday night and then Saturday as well.
That's fine.
Early Shana Tov, everybody.
Thank you.
Shana Tov.
You.
And we'll
Bye-bye.
catch you later.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, all.